Story 1. Last winter, around January, my family and close friends were enjoying a cozy New Year's getaway at our condo in Vermont. My dad was the proud owner of the 8-unit complex where our condo was located. All the units except one were occupied, as everyone had gathered for the holiday festivities. Our condo complex had a decent parking area, but things could get tight when everyone was there at once. It all started one chilly evening when we returned from a day of skiing. We parked our car in the spot closest to the stairs to make unloading our gear easier. Our parking lot wasn't fancy. It was just gravel and dirt with no designated parking spaces, so it was pretty much a first-come, first-served situation. A few hours later, my brother went down to the car to retrieve something and was surprised to find a cardboard sign placed on our vehicle. The sign read, "Reserved parking for Unit 8. Handicapped." Yes, they misspelled handicapped on both sides of the sign. Keep in mind that there were no assigned parking spaces for anyone in the complex. Unit 8 was one of the smaller units on the ground level, about half the size of the others. The tenants who rented Unit 8 were, to put it mildly, sketchy characters. Let's call them Rick and Tara. Rick and Tara were in their mid-20s, and we didn't know much about them as they kept to themselves. We rarely saw them around, and that raised some eyebrows. About 20 minutes after my brother's discovery, I headed down to the car to retrieve a pair of forgotten gloves. As I approached the car and unlocked it, the lights signaled my presence. Suddenly, Rick started yelling at me from behind the car's window, demanding that I move the car by the morning or they would have it towed. It was apparent that Rick was under the influence of something, and his speech was incoherent. I decided to ignore him, grabbed my gloves, and quickly retreated to our condo. Back inside, I shared my experience with my dad. He had reached his limit and decided to confront Rick himself. My dad had briefly met Rick and Tara during the leasing process for their unit. However, he had undergone a significant change in appearance since then due to his cancer diagnosis and subsequent weight loss. Rick didn't recognize my dad as the landlord and continued to rant about the parking situation. As my dad attempted to reason with Rick, he noticed a pipe-like object on a table in their living area. Coupled with Rick's erratic behavior and appearance, my dad concluded that it was a drug pipe. He decided to step back from the conversation and return to our condo. That's when he called the police to explain the situation and what he had observed. 30 minutes later, the police arrived at the scene and began talking to Rick and Tara. Based on my dad's information about the pipe, one of the officers spotted it, this time in plain sight along with a bag of drugs. It was revealed that they were smoking crack, and both of them were promptly arrested. In addition to their drug-related charges, my dad also initiated eviction proceedings against Rick and Tara for violating the terms of their lease. It was a no-brainer. Smoking crack inside the condo was a clear breach of the rules. After their arrest, we decided to renovate the entire unit because who knows how long they had been using drugs inside. The silver lining in this bizarre situation was the cardboard sign that still hangs in our living room, serving as a constant reminder of the incident and providing us with a good laugh every time we pass by it. To address some concerns, I'd like to clarify that neither Rick nor Tara had any disabilities or handicaps that justified them claiming a reserved spot. Also, throughout the story, when I referred to buyers, I meant renters. I understand that some might disagree with how we handled the situation, but as landlords, having tenants who were using drugs inside the property was a serious issue that needed immediate attention. We empathize with those who have overcome addiction, but in this case, ensuring the safety and well-being of all tenants was our top priority. Lastly, Rick and Tara were not locked up for an extended period. They were held overnight in custody. Story 2. I was just trying to have a peaceful ride home on the train when everything went wrong. I was sitting in my seat, minding my own business, when this woman, Karen, got on with her kid. Let's call him Timmy. They both seemed to be in a very good mood, laughing and talking loudly. They were both dressed in okay clothes. As they walked by me, I could smell the strong scent of alcohol on Karen's breath. They were both acting entitled, like they were too good for the rest of us on the train. They were looking around the train as if they were inspecting it, like they were not happy with what they saw. They took the seats across from me, and that's when I couldn't help but overhear their conversation. Karen said, "Come on, Timmy, let's light one of these fireworks, it will be fun." Timmy replied, "Yeah, it will be so cool, everyone will see us." I couldn't believe what I was hearing, but before I knew it, they had lit the first firework and threw it out of the window. I thought to myself, this is already reckless, what are they thinking? Timmy was clearly excited about the fireworks, and he was eager to light another one. He kept begging his mom, Karen, to let him light another one. Karen, who was feeling a little tipsy, was clearly not in her right mind, and she finally gave in to her child's demands. "Okay, one more won't hurt," she said as she handed another firework to Timmy. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was clear that they had no regard for the safety of others and were only thinking about their own enjoyment. As Timmy lit the second firework, he slips and drops it on the train floor instead of holding it out of the window. The firework immediately started to spark and emit smoke, creating a chaotic scene as people started to scream and run around, trying to get away from the sparks and flames. The train crew, trying to control the situation, quickly pulled the emergency brake, but the fire was spreading quickly. I was stuck in my seat, unable to move, watching as this whole thing went down. The panic and chaos around me was overwhelming, and I felt like I was in a nightmare. The smell of smoke and the sound of people screaming were all I could hear. As the train came to a stop, I could see the police arriving outside, and I knew that it was only a matter of time before they took action. When the police entered the train, they immediately made their way to Karen and Timmy, who were still sitting in their seats, completely unhinged by the commotion around them. They seemed to be in their own little world. It was only when the police and the firefighters arrived that they realized the gravity of their actions. They were arrested and charged with endangering the lives of others and causing damage to public property. As they were led away in handcuffs, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. They had acted recklessly and irresponsibly, and they deserved to be held accountable for their actions. I just hope that this incident serves as a lesson to others that their actions can have serious consequences, and that they should always think about the safety of others before their own enjoyment. Story 3. Hi, I'm just an ordinary guy. Well, perhaps a little less ordinary. You see, I'm autistic, and I've got my trusty sidekick, Storm, a border collie who's in training to be a psychiatric assistance animal. We've been on quite a journey together, and today I'm going to share with you one of the wildest adventures we've had to date. I can't help but think this story belongs on Rentitled People, and it all started when we boarded a train for a ride into the city. Storm and I have been working diligently to prepare him for his role as my psychiatric assistance animal. This means getting him accustomed to different environments, sounds, and smells. For our training, we often need to ride on trains, airplanes, and visit various buildings. On this particular day, we were headed for a 1 hour and 15-minute train ride to the city. We got on the train at the front, right next to the guard, as we usually do. The guard was aware of our situation and gave us the green light. I showed him the letter stating Storm was in training, and everything seemed fine. Storm, being the well-behaved collie he is, nestled himself under my legs, taking up as little space as possible, just like he was trained to do. But then came the moment that would lead to an encounter with two of the most entitled people I've ever met, Karen and her daughter, whom I've lovingly nicknamed Karen Jr. At the first stop, in walked Karen and her daughter. Karen Jr., they took the seats on the other side of the aisle, right next to me. It didn't take long for Karen Jr. to spot Storm and express her interest in him. "Mom, that man has a dog. Can I pat it?" Karen Jr. inquired. Her mother replied with something along the lines of, "Just ask." At the time, I wasn't paying much attention to their conversation, as I was trying to stay focused on our training. The next thing I knew, I heard, "Excuse me?" from Karen Jr. That's when the following conversation took place. Karen Jr. "Could I pat your dog?" Me, am sorry, but no. He's currently in training and can't be pet. Karen Jr. "What do you mean he's training?" Me. He's training to be an assistance animal, and it's very important that no one interferes with him. Karen. Come back, sweetie. Unfortunately, some people don't know how to share. I was trying my best to remain calm, but Storm could sense that my anxiety was flaring up. He got up and comforted me, exactly as he was trained to do. I rewarded him with a treat, a hearty good boy, and then gave him the lay command. This is when the situation escalated. The Karen approached us. Karen, you should be teaching him to interact with children. My daughter just wanted to give him a pat, and you rewarding him for ignoring her is just plain rude. Me. Excuse me. He's working and currently in training. I rewarded him for responding to me appropriately, not for ignoring your kid. Please, leave us alone. Karen, you're lying. He's not a Labrador. They are the only dogs that are smart enough to become assistance animals. He looks like a border collie. They are just farm dogs, so quit lying. My anxiety was reaching its peak, and Storm, always by my side, got up and sat on my lap to comfort and calm me down. I reached for my treat pouch to give him another reward, but Karen, with her brazen entitlement, reached in and took a treat before me. Karen, good boy. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I screamed, "Get away from me," and tears streamed down my face. The train came to an unscheduled stop at the next station, and a group of police officers boarded. Karen and Karen Jr. were swiftly moved to the next carriage, and an officer stayed with me until the next station. But this was far from the end of our encounter with the entitled duo. Fast forward to the end of the line, and we arrived in the city. As I was talking to the guard who had actually arranged for the police to join us, Karen and Karen Jr. spotted us. Karen Jr. made a beeline for us, and just as I saw her hand reach out toward Storm, I gave him the command, other side. He swiftly moved behind and to my left, away from her. Me. I told you no. Karen Jr. My mom said I could, so let me. With that, she tried to pull Storm's leash out of my hand. In that split second, I made a crucial decision. I dropped the lead and gave Storm the command, danger. He knew what to do. He bolted and sat under a seat in the middle of the platform, safely away from the chaos unfolding around him. And then Karen entered the scene, pushing me on the shoulder. At this point, my fight or flight response took over. I pushed her back, and she tumbled to the ground. More police officers appeared on the platform within what felt like seconds. I called for Storm, and as the officers arrived, I handed them his paperwork and explained everything that had happened. It was a relief to see the authorities take swift action. Karen was arrested for assault and interfering with a service animal. Now, here I am, writing this from inside a police station, waiting to provide a victim impact statement. I couldn't have anticipated that our journey to the city would take such a dramatic turn, but it's a story I felt compelled to share with you all. Story 4. I got hired as a line cook straight out of culinary school at a well-known hotel chain. My role was to handle the day-to-day cooking, and we had 8 other line cooks, along with a head chef who was always bragging about his workload. He would constantly talk about how he spared us from the paperwork nightmare. For the most part, however, the head chef was rarely present in the kitchen. Instead, he focused on administrative tasks, handling orders, completing food safety logs, stocking supplies, managing timesheets, creating schedules, coordinating with human resources, general management, and the food and beverage department, and designing menus. The job paid decently, and there wasn't much hassle. However, the menus we had to cook from were outdated and uninspiring. They looked like they had come straight out of a cookbook from 70 years ago. As a kitchen team, we grew frustrated and requested permission to create the menus ourselves. Surprisingly, the head chef agreed without much resistance. Then came an unexpected change. We had a late-night menu with simple meals like sandwiches, pizza, salads, soup, fries, and hamburgers. For some reason, corporate decided to eliminate this menu and replace it with the regular day menu. This led to a major problem: almost no one ordered food during the night shift. It turned out that when guests arrived late at night, they were either too tired or not interested in waiting 15 minutes for a plated meal. Many were not in the mood for something like sautéed salmon in white wine sauce. This policy remained in place for a year, and corporate eventually noticed a significant drop in late-night food revenue across all locations. Their solution? Instead of fixing the menu issue, they fired all night shift line cooks or relocated them to other hotels if termination wasn't an option. The late-night menu still wasn't reinstated, so the responsibility for these shifts had to be assigned elsewhere. I had been working there for about 2 years when I had a falling out with the head chef. We didn't see eye to eye, which led to an unfortunate consequence. I was assigned to almost every night shift. I would come in at 4 p.m. and leave around 5 a.m. On paper, I was scheduled for 40 hours a week, but in reality, I was working closer to 50. I didn't mind too much since I was paid for overtime, and as a 21-year-old, the extra money was great. The problem was that the job became incredibly boring. At first, I occupied my time by deep cleaning the kitchen, checking the refrigerators for expired products, setting up some of the breakfast prep, and handling minor paperwork. But after about 3 weeks, I ran out of things to do. Tasks that originally took an hour now took 10 to 15 minutes. So, I did what any reasonable person would do. I found ways to pass the time. I started reading books, watching movies, chatting with a night manager, experimenting with new recipes, and mentoring the interns. In short, I was keeping myself entertained while waiting for the occasional late-night food order. Eventually, I was called into the general manager's office. He gave me a verbal warning for slacking off. When I asked why, he told me that someone had reported my night shift activities. I explained to him that I had very little work to do during those hours and was still completing all my assigned tasks. This led to a discussion between corporate, the general manager, and my union regarding what my responsibilities should be. But that's a story for another time. At the end of this ordeal, the head chef decided to pile all his paperwork onto me. He smugly told me that the time for slacking was over and expected me to struggle with his workload. His assumption was that I wouldn't be able to keep up and would eventually beg for help. My new tasks included managing timesheets, ordering produce, and responding to emails. The head chef always bragged about how difficult and time-consuming this work was, claiming it took an entire week to complete. But after taking one look at the system, I quickly realized that he was not proficient with computers. Within a month, I discovered that our time management software could be linked to the payroll system. All I had to do was verify that breaks were logged correctly, hit the sync button, and submit it for approval by the general manager and human resources. The same applied to our ordering system. I could upload a produce list and place orders directly from an iPad while checking the walk-in refrigerators and freezers. I combined this with my scheduled inventory checks, making the entire process seamless. A few weeks later, I figured out that our scheduling software allowed me to copy a work schedule from one week to another. With an additional software link, the Human Resources app would automatically notify me if someone was on leave or vacation. It took me just 2 night shifts to complete all of these tasks. The other 3 nights, well, I was back to having free time again. With all the administrative work now streamlined, the head chef had nothing to do in his office. With no paperwork to bury himself in, he was left sitting around all day. This went on for about 2 months until someone accidentally informed the general manager. Once the general manager learned that the head chef was essentially doing nothing all day, changes were made. He was forced to work on the kitchen floor again, and his comfortable 9-to-5 schedule was replaced with early morning shifts. He had been out of practice for years, and his cooking methods were outdated. He was still stuck in an era where gelatin molds were trendy. Soon after, corporate caught wind of the efficiency improvements and requested that the head chef document everything and submit it to them. By the time I left the company for other opportunities, corporate was considering eliminating the head chef position entirely and shifting those responsibilities to the food and beverage manager. Sometimes, if you try to make someone's job harder out of spite, it might just come back to bite you. Story 5. I was working a job that had me operating in one of our offices overseas. We would have business expenses, and those receipts would be in the language of the country we were in, obviously. Those expenses were for things like printer ink, office equipment, cleaning services, marketing costs, all pretty standard stuff. Well, around this time, we got a new vice president over our region who worked out of head office in Leh. This vice president came up with this brilliant idea to hire a translator to translate all of receipts to make sure we weren't sneaking in bullcrap. Fair enough. However, the issue that arose was that we had to send our expenses to the translator, who would translate the receipt, then submit for reimbursement. The problem was this translator was a real Karen type. She would demand better scans of the receipts, oftentimes after we had already thrown it away. She would argue if we really got the best deal on whatever we bought. I remember in one transaction on about $200 of ink cartridges, she asked me why I didn't order online from this common website. To which I said they were out of stock at the time, and we needed the ink, so we bought from a local store. To which she said I was spending too much money. To which I said it's none of your concern, your job is to translate the receipt. To which she said if I want her to submit my expenses, I need to be nice to her. To which I said she needs to learn her place. She's a translator, not a vice president that gets to instruct me what to do. After this encounter, she started being extra anal with my expenses. So one day I came in the office early to call her and try and work things out. She basically told me that I screwed up by pissing her off, and she expected my expense reports to be perfect, or she wouldn't submit them unless they were. I told her if she keeps this up, she won't have a job much longer. She laughed and wished me well and hung up. A few months later, we had our annual meeting in Leh, and after the meeting we were at a bar, and I walked up to our vice president and started up a conversation. I steered the conversation to expenses, and I asked him how much in monthly expenses did he typically reimburse us for in the country we worked out of. He said about $3,000 to $4,000. I acted surprised and asked, "Is that all?" He goes, "Yay." To clarify that $3,000 to $4,000 is the typical spend, and he says yay, it rarely gets above $4,000. So I ask him about how Karen, our translator, is doing. He says she's doing a good job, and I nod my head, and I go, how much fraudulent expenses has she caught? It's important to note, every employee that was submitting expenses was well paid. They'd be awfully stupid trying to skim some extra dollars via fraudulent expense reports. He goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, you hired her to ensure all the expenses you were reimbursing us for are legitimate, right? Her job is to translate them for you, correct?" He says it is. And I ask, "So is it safe to presume you've done that to ensure people aren't submitting BS expenses?" He says, "You could say that." I smile and ask, "So how much fraudulent expenses has she caught?" He thinks for a moment and goes, "I don't think she has caught any." So I ask, "And how much do we pay her?" He says it depends on her workload, but between $2,500 to $3,000 is in a month. I smile and ask, "Does it make sense to pay someone $3,000 a month to translate $3,000 in receipts?" Well, she ensures we aren't getting fraudulent expenses, and I counter, "Well, you said she hasn't counted any in the last 9 months, and the expenses are always between $3,000 to $4,000, so as long as the expenses stay in that range, wouldn't it be safe to assume that the expenses are legitimate? And couldn't you bring on a translator on a contract basis if they get out of hand?" He sees my point. And imagine the cost savings. We would probably save over $40,000 a year. That's a good chunk of change, isn't it? The vice president tries to defend his position, but she does a good job, and I counter, "But you could frame this as you've saved us $40,000 a year and created a baseline to judge expenses by. Cutting costs is always good for the bottom line and the end of the year bonuses, isn't it?" For your information, I knew that a major percent of a vice president comp package with the company had to do with the company's margin at the end of the year. The bigger the margin, the bigger the bonus. You can see the twinkle in his eye. We carry on the rest of the night. A few weeks later, we get an email from the vice president saying that we are to submit all our expenses directly to the admin for reimbursement and that we have let go of Karen. For your information, Karen wasn't her real name, obviously. Story 6. I work as a school janitor. Half my day is spent in the lunchroom, emptying the trash cans and sweeping up. At most schools, you get at least 15 minutes between each lunch period to clean. At my school, I get less than 2 minutes if I'm lucky. Normally, if a trash can isn't full, I just dump one into another and then tie off that bag when it gets full. It's much faster than replacing every bag every time, and it saves a lot of bags. I also sweep around the tables, and if I see a big mess under a table, I ask the kids to move their feet so I can sweep it up. I do it this way because it's the only way to keep up and keep things clean. If I pulled every bag every time instead of consolidating the trash, I would run out of bags halfway through the week. It would also take significantly longer. If I only swept under tables when there were no kids sitting there, I would never have an opportunity to clean properly. Then, there are the lunch ladies. Most of them are nice, but there's one older woman who seems to always be in a bad mood. She yells at everyone, including the kids, and is constantly angry about something. Earlier this week, she yelled at me for consolidating the trash instead of pulling every bag. Why she chose to do this after I had been working this way for over 3 years, I have no idea. I know how to do my job and didn't ask for her opinion, so I just ignored her and kept working. Fast forward a couple of hours, and I get a call from my district supervisor. He tells me a complaint was filed against me. The lunch staff said they didn't like that I consolidated trash instead of replacing every bag, and that they didn't appreciate me sweeping under the students' feet. My boss instructed me to clean only between lunch periods. I tried explaining that I only had about 2 minutes, which wasn't nearly enough time, but he told me to do it anyway to avoid further complaints. He's a reasonable person, but he was just trying to keep the peace. He told me from now on, I was only allowed to empty trash and sweep floors when the cafeteria was empty. Also, I had to replace every trash bag instead of consolidating. Cue my compliance exactly as requested. From that moment on, I followed the new instructions to the letter. Since I could only clean between lunches, I barely had time to get through half of the trash cans. Replacing every bag took longer, meaning I didn't have time to sweep at all. The cans I couldn't get to filled up and overflowed. The students didn't care and kept piling trash on top. The floor became messier each day because I wasn't allowed to sweep while they were sitting there. I followed this method for the rest of the week. The same grumpy lunch lady tried to yell at me on Tuesday, demanding that I empty a trash can while the students were still eating. I simply explained, I was told by my supervisor that you all didn't want me sweeping or emptying trash around the kids, so I'm only allowed to clean when the cafeteria is empty. I'd love to take care of that trash can, but there are students eating lunch right now, so I'm not allowed. She tried to argue, but I repeated that I was following direct and explicit orders from my boss. There was nothing she could do about it. When the final lunch ended, I cleaned as much as I could before 2 p.m., then stopped. That was my lunch break, and per union regulations, I had to take my break at my scheduled time, no exceptions. After my lunch break, I had to clean classrooms, which took priority over the cafeteria. The end result? The cafeteria never got fully cleaned. When the lunch staff came in on Monday morning and found the cafeteria still in a mess from Friday, they were furious. They immediately filed another complaint. My supervisor called me in, and I explained that I was simply following the instructions they had insisted on. By the end of our conversation, I was told to go back to cleaning the way I had been doing it before. If you're going to interfere with my job and insist I change the way I work, be prepared to deal with the consequences. Oh, and since then, I started calling them out on all their own mistakes. Previously, I had minded my own business, but now we're following the rulebook exactly. Is the kitchen door propped open because it gets too hot? Sorry, but that's a security violation. No exceptions. Did someone toss greasy wax paper into the cardboard recycling? That's not allowed. Normally, I would have just pulled it out myself, but now? I waited until the end of the day and made them sort it out by hand. Do they like listening to the radio while they work? Unfortunately, that's against school policy. Time to turn it off. They wanted to play by the rules. Well, now they get all of them. Story 7. This is a few years back, though I am still driving my 2005 Santa Fe that's involved with this little dust-up. I had just gotten a new job in a different state, and because it was somewhat of a promotion, the company paid entirely for the move. After seeing all of my stuff packed away safely, the movers started heading to the new state. But as they were driving a different route to avoid icy roads through the Rockies, they were going to take a little longer, so we drove through the night and ended up staying at a hotel. On the way over, I noticed my brakes starting to vibrate just a bit on the descent into the new state, and they were squeaking a tad. New brake pads, maybe new rotors if they can't be machined. No big deal, right? So, after we got our stuff unloaded and into the new place, I took the car to a mechanic's shop that had good ratings and was even recommended to me by a coworker. But I swear they took a look at my out-of-state license plates and saw dollar signs. When I dropped off the car, I signed the work order for a tire rotation. I know, I'm lazy and a free inspection. Just wanting them to confirm my suspicion on the brakes, I specifically told them to not do any work unless I specifically authorized them over the phone and in writing. You can probably guess what happened next. I called after about an hour to see what they'd found, and sure enough, the boss of the shop said that, unfortunately, I not only needed new pads and rotors, but new calipers as well, totaling $1,200. But not to worry, as they'd already started working on it and would have it done in just under a couple hours. Needless to say, I was pissed as all hell, and told him that I had not authorized that, nor did I agree that those repairs were likely necessary. I told him I would be over in a minute, to cease all work on the car, and that I would talk to him in person. On the way over, I called a different shop, one that had better ratings, and the one I eventually used for every car-related need after this for the rest of the time I lived in that state, and explained the situation. She said that it was highly suspect that they wanted to replace the calipers, but that they'd be happy to give me a second opinion, of course, and that they usually ran around $300 for new pads and rotors. I always get second and sometimes third opinions on non-emergency repairs like this, just because of the skewed incentives on the dodgy repair places to trump up what's needed like the original place was doing. Anyway, I get to the repair shop and proceed to tell the manager that I was taking my car elsewhere for a second opinion, and that if he was right and the calipers needed to be replaced along with the rest of the brake assembly, I would be happy to have him bid on the work. He responded that he'd be happy to have my car towed to a different shop for $150, but that he was legally obligated to hold my car as it was an unsafe vehicle, and he would be liable for any damages that ensued if my brakes were to fail should I leave. I knew this was nonsense. We yelled about it for 10 minutes, with him every time refusing to budge, saying that he'd have it towed for $150 or do the repairs, nothing else. I told him he was committing grand theft auto, and that I would call the cops if he didn't put my car back together and let me drive away. He told me to do it, that they would back him 100%, and they might fine me for driving with completely destroyed brakes. So, I did. I called the non-emergency police line and was eventually transferred to a very nice female police officer, and I calmly explained to her my situation. She was super helpful and confirmed, of course, that the mechanic had no legal basis to hold my car against my will, and although she did warn me that I was of course liable for any and all problems that might arise if I was indeed driving with bad brakes, it wasn't his problem. She actually laughed at him, saying he was liable if I got into a wreck after I left, and that he was in violation of the law. So, I took my cell phone in and had him talk to her, and he proceeded to be a massive jerk to her on the phone, at first not believing that she was, in fact, a real police officer, and then insisting that she didn't know what she was talking about, had done this before and knew the law. He still didn't believe she was a real, actual police officer, So she promised that he'd find out soon enough. She told me she said that after he handed the phone back to me. 15 minutes later, after I waited outside because I was really close to just losing it talking to this jerk, a squad car rolls up and asks me where the manager is. They were informed already of the situation, walked up to the guy, and handed him something I assume was either a ticket or a summons or something. They wouldn't tell me what afterward, but they did look satisfied as all hell and were super nice to me, and told him to put my car back together immediately and let me go. This had all been over 4+ hours from the time I dropped my car off to the time they drove it out of the bay ready for me to drive away. And after all that, he hands me the bill $50 for a tire rotation and $100 for the inspection. I had a copy of the original, of course, and told him to go screw himself on the inspection fee, and looking at my car outside, I told him to see for himself that the tires weren't actually rotated. The cops were still there, too. So there wasn't much he could do, but let me sign a $0 work order for nothing and walk away. It was glorious. And of course, the other repair shop said it was just the pads that needed to be replaced, and they were able to machine the rotors so that there wasn't a hint of vibration. All told, $200, and a great new mechanic I could trust in a new area to boot. Seriously, when I find a mechanic or dentist that I know is honest, I will remain loyal to them until I die or move more than 4 hours away.